battle for Donbass begins. Russia renews its offensive in eastern Ukraine, but Kiev says its defense is ready. Can Ukrainian forces continue to resist, or is the conflict at a turning point? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the battle for Donbass. Well, over the past months, Ukrainian forces have proven a number of military analysts dead wrong, showing their capacity to repulse a brutal Russian onslaught. But though the first phase of the fighting may not have gone to plan for Moscow, some say things are about to change as Russia refocuses its efforts on eastern Ukraine. It's been dubbed the battle for Donbass, and should the Kremlin succeed, it could shift the entire trajectory of the war. But the conflict so far has been unpredictable. Ukrainian forces have resisted for this long, and President Volodymyr Zelensky says his troops will continue to defend the country no matter what.
The situation in the east and south remains extremely harsh. The occupiers are attempting with their new massive attack to snatch at least some kind of victory, at least something that they could feed to their propaganda peddlers. My heartfelt thanks go to every defender of ours, to our armed forces, to our cities, to our communities who are repelling the invaders. They are standing firm and by their actions are truly saving our country.
Since Russia first attacked Ukraine in February, Kiev has been begging its allies for help. And to some extent, they have delivered. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of weapons have been sent to Ukraine as they face the might of the Russian military. But with this new offensive in the east, Western nations have pledged to send bigger, heavier weapons, and leaders are grateful.
I'm very glad to say with a careful optimism that our partners have come to understand our needs better, understand what we need and when exactly we need everything, not in weeks or in months, but immediately, right now, when Russia is trying to step up its attacks.
Well, eastern Ukraine was a flashpoint even before February's attack. Ukrainian forces have been battling Russian-backed separatists, vying for control of the region for almost a decade. After Russia refocused its efforts on the Donbass, Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov was clear about what Moscow wants to achieve.
Operation in the east of Ukraine is aimed, as was announced from the very beginning, to fully liberate the Donetsk and Lugansk republics. And this operation will continue. It is beginning, another stage of this operation is beginning, and I'm sure this will be a very important moment of this entire special operation.
So if Russia's offensive is now just about Donbass, could there be an end in sight? Well, joining me now to try to answer that from Washington is David DesRoches, a security studies professor at the National Defense University. Donald Bowser is in eastern Poland. He's an international peace and security consultant. And from Moscow, we have Sergey Markov, a former member of the Russian parliament. Thanks all so much for being with us. Sergey, if I can quickly start with you, and I need to ask about Mariupol, because a week ago you said it had already fallen. Your government says it's been liberated, but just today, President Putin ordered troops not to storm the Azovstal plant, where Ukrainian forces are still fighting. I mean, why not? Why this hesitation now?
Good question. Mariupol liberated. It means that the city where 400,000 people lived, they liberated from a repressive regime. I'm sure that I think that nobody has never been in Mariupol. I've been in Mariupol many times, even when it was under the Kiev control in Ukraine before the overthrowing of the last democratic elected president in 2014. And I know that 90% of the population want to be in Russia, dream to be in Russia.
Right, you've said that before. So why this hesitation? Why is it? You said that the city had been taken already a week ago.
Mariupol. Yeah.
Right.
Mariupol.
So it hasn't been taken. Go ahead.
Yeah. Azovstal, Mariupol is taken and fully liberated. Azovstal, it's a factory in Mariupol. It's huge industrial zone. Now it's fully blocked because neo-Nazi from Azov built a very good fortune there. Russian president decided not to pay a life of Russian soldiers and officers, but just to block them and to wait when they will surrender.
So you're waiting for them to surrender. Understood. That's the tactic now. But still, you said you will not describe this as a turning point at all. Why not?
It's not turning point because it just will be continuation of the military attack. It's just finishing of some period of some stage, and now some just troops will start to the big military operation on Donbass, where Russian army is going to surround the biggest group of Ukrainian armies, then either to crush them or to disarm them, and then to repeat same demands which Russian president already expressed. First, stopping political terror. Second, denazification. And so demilitarization of the Ukrainian regime. And also all war crime should be arrested in Ukraine territory and should be punished. There are thousands of them, and most of the Ukrainian government included war criminals.
So Sergey would say that the Russian military is indeed achieving its goals, liberating territories. But Donald, you, in contrast, you've called Russian military a paper tiger. You think that its military could actually be worn down sooner rather than later because you've said they have no reinforcements, really. I have to put this to you. I mean, they may have their problems, but like it or not, militarily speaking, Russia tends to get what it goes after. So are you sure you're not actually underestimating the Russian military?
Well, where have they actually gotten what they've wanted?
Pretty much everywhere except Afghanistan.
I don't know. I mean, look at Chechen 1. Complete failure of the
but
Russian military.
They got it after Dagestan.
Well, they've managed to destroy Grozny and flatten it, yes. But in terms of military, they very ignominiously withdrew. So they lost that one. That was very clear. And this is just an absolute replication of Chechen 1. They came into Kiev. They were going to take Kiev at all costs. And what happened? They failed. Why? Because it's the same corrupt and incompetent army that has been for the last 30 years. In terms of Mariupol, I've been many times to Mariupol since 2014. Nobody wanted to be freed. The majority of the city are Russian speaking. Those that have been killed may have been liberated, but that's about it. They've been liberated from life, thing that they've been liberated from. There was no desire to join Russia. That's exactly why Russia was unable to take it for 8 years. It's been heavily defended, heavily fortified, yes, and they withstood assault after assault in the last 8 years. So you can't say that somehow the population of Mariupol wanted to be liberated from who? They were the ones on the front lines fighting.
Right. Donald, I mean, we have discussed that at length before. We know that is the Russian line, and we know Ukraine says, the opposite is entirely true. But when we're looking at military achievements of Russia, this isn't about who's right or who's wrong. You may argue now that Russia tried to overreach by going through Kiev. Some say there was even a strategy to that, just, wreak as much havoc as possible so that you can come back and get the region you do want in eastern Ukraine. Russia wants the Donbass, and it looks quite possible, let me put it that way, that it will get that. So its goals...
Well, if we look at the front line, they haven't moved at all in terms of the contact line in Donetsk. They've moved a little bit in terms of the contact line in Lugansk. They haven't moved at all in front of the contact line in Donetsk. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about sub-movements towards Izum, but look at the rest of the contact line in Donetsk. For the last 2 months, they have been unable to move beyond it.
Okay,
so if this was really the intention, where was the effort to roll over the line? So the advances they made in Mariupol are great, but they haven't been able to move beyond that. And the only movement that they've made is in terms of Lugansk, in which they're going to have the exact same problems they have in terms of supply and logistics. They are going over some very narrow roads in Lugansk, and I've been on them. I know exactly where they're going to have to come through, which again will be more hitting of their supply lines and more essentially tactically outmaneuvered by the Ukrainian forces. So,
So, Donald, you
as
think
much as
Ukraine can take this?
oh yes, absolutely, because we just look at the exact same performance that was happening in Kiev. I've talked to a lot of friends around the line in Kiev, and they saw the same level of incompetency that we saw in 1995 in terms of Chechnya, throwing men after men into positions that they had no chance. So what's going to happen? They're going to have another failure, exactly like they did in the Battle of Kiev, for exactly the same reasons. They don't have the troops anymore to be able to push through, unless they go for mass mobilization, which will be strongly resisted. It's clear that people are not signing up for short-term contracts in the Russian army. The reserves that Ukraine have is quite extensive, and Ukraine has no supply problems. Every day, more and more material is being brought into Ukraine. They do not have the equipment problems that Russia has because they're being resupplied daily. They're now getting heavier and heavier weapons. They're getting more tanks. They even have aircraft that have. So in terms of
Okay.
being able to counter Russia, Ukraine's supply problems are non-existent, and Russia's still are very much existent.
Okay, let me ask David DesRoches. I mean, is Ukraine in that strong of a position? Can we see them really turn this around, even in Donbass?
Yeah, well, I suppose I got to start by saying I've never been to Mariupol. Yeah, look, most military analysts were shocked by the poor performance of the Russian army, but we thought it was much better than they were. And the Ukrainian forces have really, really been effective. It appears to me that because of the Russian success in Crimea, which I think there was a significant pro-Russian population, Russia thought they could extend that success, that model of victory, over the whole of Ukraine. There was a report in, I think, the New York Times yesterday that said Putin was briefed that 30 to 50% of the Ukrainian army would surrender on contact and defect. That's clearly not the case. What we've seen now is that most of the Russian military capability is either poorly deployed, it's poorly maintained, so it's not capable of moving, and there's no doubt that it's poorly led. A lot of feared Russian capabilities, like electronic warfare, have been not utilized properly, and what we're thinking is it's because of just poor training. So what we're seeing here is on the Russian side, you have a diminishing manpower pool because Putin refuses to acknowledge it's a war, so he can't call for a general mobilization of forces who are one major defeat away from a morale collapse. And then on the Ukrainian side, you have an entirely mobilized nation that, even though it's smaller, it has the same amount of forces on the battlefield, possibly greater, and it has the benefits of being in the defense. Russia needs 5 times as many soldiers as Ukraine, at least, and they just don't have that. So, just existing is a victory for Ukraine, and I think that is possible. Contrary to everything I thought before, Ukraine could pull this out.
Okay, I mean, David, do you have any sort of time scale? Because I've heard estimates that actually the approach Russia has taken with this war of attrition, this can just go on for years.
It could, if as you see in the 2014 war in Donetsk and Luhansk, if there's fixed positions and they move on, then you could just have, trench warfare where there's isolated artillery strikes. But I think what Russia is looking to do is envelop the main body of the regular Ukrainian army in Donetsk and Luhansk. And I think what Ukraine will probably do is what they've always done, which is attack the support there. The pincher that seeks to envelop one of those pinchers, or maybe both of them, could be isolated, cut off. And then if we see thousands of Russian prisoners, that's going to be an existential moment for Putin's strategy. He's already defined victory downward once. And I think that, if he has another major defeat, it's possible we'll see a withdrawal back to the 2014 lines.
Okay, Sergey, I'll let you quickly try to convince us that Russian troops are not one defeat away from a morale collapse. Why do you think outsiders underestimate Russia's military and its will to fight, especially in this war?
It's normal mistake of all Russian enemies. I remember that Polish politician many times repeated that Russia very weak, but finally the Poland had been divided 4 times, I think, by both Russians and Germans. And as we remember, also both Napoleon Bonaparte and Adolf Hitler, the great dictator of Europe, they told that Russia is weak coloss and just push Russia and it will be down. It's normal mistake of all Russian enemies. We have Russians, we have some kind of chaos. It's normal, but nevertheless, we're doing everything very seriously. That's why we're winning all the wars. And we will win this wars as well. And it's our colleagues partly victims of own propaganda. It's propaganda to claim Ukrainian army is very strong and Russian army is very weak. Don't trust your own propaganda, dear colleagues. Anyway, you will be in a very difficult situation.
Donald, you know the Russian line. I know you've heard this before. Let me put this to you, though, because meanwhile, we have a Russia that has tested a nuclear-capable missile. Putin says it's the world's best. So we have that, plus the air power that says they can just bomb Ukraine into oblivion like they did in Chechnya and get what they want. What's to stop that scenario from unfolding?
Well, let's look at their performance in Syria. They had 64 planes that they couldn't keep aloft. So the same thing we see now. Why, after 2 months, does Russia not have air superiority? And the amount of anti-aircraft systems that are currently being put in place in Ukraine means that there is no chance that they're going to have air superiority anytime soon. So the air question seems to be out. If Russia had this power, why wouldn't they have been using it? They can't. Because, again, it's a paper tiger. They're simply on paper. They have many tanks and many aircraft, but we know that they're not operable because of the corruption and incompetency of the Russian armed forces over the years. So we see this in case after case. This is not the first time. Georgia in 2008 was a debacle. This is exactly why in 2013, Russia revised its strategies because they understood they could not confront anybody directly. This is why they adopted hybrid warfare. Igor Girkin was very clear about this. He doesn't believe that the Russian forces will be able to accomplish their goals currently in Ukraine. And he was the one who took Donbass the first time because on the Ukrainian side, it was a complete chaos. In the last 8 years, the Ukrainian forces have completely revamped themselves. I know, I was there. I saw them firsthand. And I've seen the performance of the Russian army over the years. And I can tell you, it is simply a case of where one side completely reformed their armed forces and Russia, despite all of the announcements that they were going to reform, have not been. Where are the T-14 tanks, the Armadas? All of these great announcements of weapon systems, right? Hypersonic missiles, which are just really ballistic missiles put on planes, again, hasn't given them any great advantage. So all of these pronouncements over the last couple of years have shown that they're simply false. It's a Potemkin army.
But Donald, I have to put this to you again. I'm sorry if I sound like I'm repeating myself. While you say there have been these failures, Russia says we've won in Syria. Assad is still in power, even though the entire Western world was backing the opposition to take him out. He's still there, even if Syria is still a mess. You can argue that. 20% of Georgia is still in Russian hands. And then Georgia actually went on to elect a more Russian-friendly president, even after that conflict. You talk about Chechnya. Chechnya is now run by a leader that is basically Putin's best friend. They're now supplying troops to help Putin in Ukraine. So even though it might be messy, it might not be the way, an elegant military operation would be carried out, it still gets Russia what it wants.
Chechen 1 and Chechen 2 are absolutely different wars. So
Chechnya 2 is where it stands. Russia has that.
And as for Chechens, there's lots of Chechens fighting on the Ukrainian side too. Problem is now, once the Russian army is defeated, what is going to actually happen in the North Caucasus? You understand there's not going to be anybody left in DNR and LNR, the People's Republics, so-called. So after the defeat of the Russian army and the retreat, exactly like happened in the Battle of Kiev, they lost the Battle of Kiev. You can't deny that. They threw everything they had at Kiev and failed miserably. Trust me, I've seen all of the tanks laying there and the mass graves and everything else. They lost the Battle of Kiev. They will lose the Battle of Donbass.
Okay. Ukraine must be rejoicing to hear you say that. David DesRoches, let me come back to you, and I want to do a step back and look at how far everything has come so far. In hindsight, could this conflict have been prevented? Was there something Ukraine or even NATO could have done in the lead up? Or was it purely inevitable that because Russia simply feels that Donbass is part of Russia, that it would have invaded no matter what? It wants to take this territory.
That's a really good question. A lot of people are arguing over that. I think that the consensus is shifting towards the fact that Russia basically has a imperialist vision of Eurasia, and that it regards Ukraine as not a legitimate country, not a legitimate nation, but rather as misguided Russians whose natural destiny is to be under the control of Russia. So if that is in fact true, and you look at things like Joseph Brodsky's poems, and if that is in fact true, then policy differences are really irrelevant. They're just precepts for conflict. It appears that Russians believe, or that the Russian government believes, that Crimea, Odessa, the entire Black Sea littoral, the Sea of Azov, the Donbass, all of that rightfully belongs to Russia, and that anybody who opposes that is either a Nazi or a Banderite. And the vision, I think, for Ukraine is that everything west of the Dnieper, this sort of agricultural hinterland, landlocked, that can be this impoverished Ukraine, which is dependent on Russia. Unfortunately, the same logic also applies to Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, which are NATO members. So I think there's a significant problem there for those who buy the Sting line and say, I hope the Russians love their children too. We're dealing with a mindset here that, quite frankly, is imperialist. And I'm not sure if a policy concession could have reconciled that.
Okay. So, I mean, is there any hope, any scope for negotiations at this point? Or is Putin still needing a victory to even think about coming to the table, especially with May 9th coming up?
Yeah, so he needs to declare a victory somehow. I think that, quite frankly, we're at the point prior to the revelation of the war crimes committed by the Russian forces in their defeat and retreat from Kiev, negotiations might have been possible. I think right now there will have to be a development on the battlefield. One side will have to have suffered such a bad defeat that it is willing to make concessions that previously were unthinkable. And I think that perhaps the Ukrainians, saying, look, we have no intention of joining NATO, and recognizing the 2014 secession of Donetsk and Luhansk, if they're defeated, that might be it. I'm not quite sure what the minimum, that might be an acceptable minimum condition for Russia. I'm not sure what Ukraine would accept. I think the fall of Mariupol is kind of expected, so I don't think that would be the defeat that would lead to negotiations. Basically, there has to be developments on the battlefield, I think, before both sides see the imperative to negotiate a settlement.
Sergey, is there any talk in Moscow for how far away negotiations might still be?
There are a lot of talks about this, and nobody knows exactly. There are different positions. What Vladimir Putin has a real plan in his mind. Nobody knows. It's a top secret, and I believe it will be partly depend on how military operation will develop. And there are few versions. One that, by the way, Kherson People Republic, I think, will be claimed in a few days from now, and it's probably it's minimum version that independent from Ukraine, Lugansk People Republic, Donetsk People Republic, and Kherson People Republic. It means that it's a big strip from Russia through Donbass and Kherson to the Crimea, and also water channel will be controlled by Russia to the Crimea. Minimum. Then next option is this territory, additionally with biggest Russian city of Ukraine. It's Kharkov, Zaporozhye, Nikolaev, Odessa, and Dnipro. It's second option. Third option is territory which we should include also Kiev and central Ukraine. And my suggestion is that more realistic this second option.
Second option. Okay, Sergey, I will have to give you the final word. I apologize, Donald, for not being able to come back to you, but that's all the time we have for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us as always, and our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.